Here, in the forest dark and deep, I offer you eternal sleep. The Poor Little Rich Girl by Eleanor Gates. Since the beginning of human history, we have noticed that certain areas on this earth seem to be different and far more mysterious than others. We have created folklore in an attempt to explain the seemingly supernatural events that occur in these strange places. These areas are the home of gods, monsters, ghosts, or portals to another world, and are often considered haunted or even sacred. Tales of disappearances, strange happenings, or even death often accompany these locations. Forests are often the subject of this kind of folklore, as they seem to hold dark secrets and dangers just out of our eyes' reach. The Hoia Baciu forest in Romania is no exception. Located in a country that is already steeped in folklore, the Hoia Baciu forest and the clearing located inside of it stands out just by the sheer number of strange occurrences and the physical effects it's had on its visitors. Join us as we go deep into the woods on this minisode of Snipe Hunt. We're back. You're listening to the latest minisode of Snipe Hunt, your frightening folklore podcast, and I'm your host, Darren Young. On these minisodes, I cover topics that don't seem to have quite enough content to do a full episode on, and I try to go for a more serious tone than the full episodes. But of course, if the opportunity for a joke presents itself, I don't think I'll be able to resist. I realize that I missed a review or two on the last full episode, but don't worry, we will still read them on air next time. I would also like to apologize for the audio in the Glitches in Reality episode. I had my headphones around my neck, and the microphone was picking up the output. Although of all the episodes to mess up on, I find it kind of funny that it's the one about glitches. I have a great episode for you guys today. So for the first time, we are talking about an actual location that is well known for the strange things that happen in it. I say for the first time because we mostly cover creatures on the show, but we broke tradition with the Glitches in Reality episode, and we'll continue on for this minisode. I'll describe the location, share some experiences, then speculate on what might actually be happening there. We sort of covered a location in episode 4 when we discussed the Crescent Hotel, but we didn't dedicate an entire episode to the hotel. At least, not yet. Foreshadowing. Just a warning. On this podcast, I don't try to debunk anything. I try to leave it for the listener to decide. The exception to this being the Mothman episode, but I was still trying to figure out this podcasting thing, and I'll probably do a less biased follow-up episode on the famous cryptid at some point in the future. On this minisode, I'm going to sound a little more skeptical than usual, but I'm only trying to separate fiction from facts to better let you decide what exactly is going on. I, for one, identify as an optimistic skeptic. I like to believe there is actual paranormal phenomena out there, but I also want hard evidence, or at least an experience. So what is the Hoia Baciu forest? Known as the world's most haunted forest, HoiaBaciuForest.com gives the following description on their homepage. And I apologize as I will not be able to pronounce all these names correctly, but I'll give it my best. The Hoia Baciu forest, that is situated near Cluj-Napoca, Romania, covers an area of over 250 hectares and is often referred to as the Bermuda Triangle of the country. Hoia Baciu Forest has a reputation for intense paranormal activity and unexplained events. Reports have included ghost sightings, unexplained apparitions, faces appearing in photographs that were not visible with the naked eye, and in the 1970s, UFO sightings were reported. Visitors to the forest most often report intense feelings of anxiety and the feeling of being constantly watched. Moreover, the local vegetation is somehow bizarre in appearance, like something out of a make-believe story, with strangely shaped trees and unexplained charring on the tree stumps and branches. The forest was named after a shepherd that disappeared in the area with a flock of 200 sheep. Most people who live near the forest are afraid to enter it due to the stories and legends that have been handed down. They believe that those who visit the site will never return back home. Many of the locals who have been brave enough to venture into the forest complained of physical harm, including rashes, nausea, vomiting, migraines, burns, scratches, anxiety, and other unusual sensations. Okay, now not to be a wet blanket, but I've looked at some pictures of the forest. Most of the vegetation looks normal. There are some crooked trees, but the shapes appear to be caused by artificial shaping early in the tree's growth rather than something natural. And the charring on the stumps can also be pretty easily explained. This forest is a common recreation destination, although the description makes it sound like a very remote area. That is just not the case. A bike park was recently added, and the forest is also used for other sports, such as paintball and archery. Thanks to its supernatural reputation, it has also become a popular destination for tourists. So the charred stumps could be any number of these people just building a fire. Now there definitely seems to be something weird going on in the forest, but as far as strange vegetation and charred trees, I think that's all due to human activity. Now this forest is located in Romania, which is a country steeped in folklore of all kinds, which we briefly mentioned in our Vampire Strix episode. So that might help play into the superstition of this dark forest. Now let's see what's actually happening in this area. So before I get into the more modern happenings of the forests, here are a couple of local legends courtesy of HoiaBaciuForest.com. The forest is believed by many to be a gateway to another dimension. No one knows when or where it opens, but it is a certainty in their minds that it actually exists. One story speaks of a woman that walked through the woods, and when she got in, she wandered around for a while. She reported that she had this feeling that time suddenly stopped, and she disappeared for a short while. The next thing she knew, the woman returns with a piece of ancient history in her pocket, but she has no idea where the item came from. There are also reports of a 5-year-old girl who disappeared into the forest while out playing. Desperately, her parents and the community searched for her with no luck. Finally, they gave up the search and assumed the girl was gone forever. 5 years later, however, the girl emerged from the forest wearing exactly the same clothes as she wore the day she disappeared. She was never the same, and they say that she had no memory of what happened to her. Okay, I followed up on the piece of ancient history that this woman found in her pocket, and apparently it was a gold coin dated to be from the 15th century. Now, there is no actual evidence of these happenings, but they do provide a good example of the supernatural reputation of this forest. Legends of this wood have been around for a long time, but the first recorded phenomena were photographs of an unidentified round object in the sky taken by witness Emil Barnea. Emil was a 45-year-old construction technician who accompanied his girlfriend, Zamfira Mattia, and 3 unnamed friends into the forest on the morning of August 18, 1968. These friends are nameless because they wish to remain anonymous. In the afternoon, they stopped to have lunch in a small clearing close to the road. Emil went to go look for some firewood, but then heard his girlfriend calling him to come look at something. Emil returned to the clearing and looked up. There was a round silvery craft floating right above the clearing. The object reflected sunlight and flew without any noise. Emil rushed to his bag, grabbed his camera, and promptly took a picture, and was able to take another one due to the slow flight speed of the mysterious object. Emil got a good look at the craft, but then it suddenly accelerated, and Emil had just enough time to take 2 more photos of the airborne sphere. The whole encounter lasted roughly 2 minutes. Emil wasn't sure what to do with his eyewitness account and his photos, knowing that people who claim to see, quote, flying saucers are ridiculed. Emil contacted his friend, Florin Georgita. I think that's how you pronounce it, Georgita. We'll go with that. An engineer, and together they went out to the site and mapped the flight path and calculated the size of the object. The photographs were then published in several newspapers in September of 1968. The director of the nearby observatory said that the object must be a weather balloon or that the photographs were faked. Investigations later revealed no evidence of weather balloons in the area at the time, and the photographs were determined to be genuine. I'll provide a link in the description of this episode that will lead to Emil Barnea's photos, as well as the notes made by Florin the engineer. Now, the photos are not great quality, which is to be expected from the cameras of the late 60s, but there definitely seems to be something in the sky. Something that was seen by many witnesses, and none of those present were able to identify it. Now, for all I can see from the photos, this object could just as well be a pie plate as a UFO, but it is just as difficult to discount this sighting as it is to prove it. ImperialTransylvania.com briefly describes Alexander Sift's interest in the forest. Drawn by stories about the forest, the biologist Andrew Sift started researching the strange occurrences in the 1950s, and it would be not long before he too would undergo peculiar experiences. Soon after his first incursions into the forest, he reported feeling like he was constantly accompanied and watched by certain presences. He called them shadows. These shadows would sometimes take the shape of a couple, a man and a woman, who would disappear into thin air as soon as they caught sight of him. He did manage to catch the man on camera once though, right after the woman had disappeared, and just as the man was starting to disappear himself. The photograph depicts the peculiar being with a stub for an arm and with parts of its body becoming translucent, a phenomenon referred to as dematerialization among connoisseurs. This precious piece of evidence is sadly one of the few kind that still exists, as the better part of the scholar's collection was stolen and destroyed soon after his passing in 1993. Unfortunately, I was unable to find the exact photo mentioned in the article, but the website did offer a few interesting photos of more unidentified aerial phenomena in the area, as well as a picture of what seems like a man's floating head. Now, the destruction of Sift's evidence is awfully convenient, but we can't rule out conspiracy. Maybe there was a government agency that did not want Sift's work to become known. Adrian Petrut, a chemistry professor at the local university and an officer for the Romanian Society of Parapsychology, has since been researching the forest for years and has many stories to tell. Here are a few, courtesy of HoiaBaciuForest.com. Adrian Petrut says, I had been photographing ruins which were right in the center of the forest. It was in January, and I had made a few hundred photos near the ruins with a large group of friends. After 2 weeks, I went back to look at that spot because I love it, and I feel good there. But the ruins were not there. No living soul could remember that they had been there. It was as if they never had been, yet I know they were. Nor has anyone seen this place after that. Never. And, very strangely, after a few years, even their pictures are gone. The images of the ruins completely vanished from my photos. Once I heard the sounds of rescue in our immediate vicinity, although I was in the middle of the forest. Sometimes you can hear the cuckoo clock sounds and the sounds of exploding tires or rubber balloons deflating in your presence. And all sorts of other strange short screams can be heard, not to mention that chirping chicken sound, which was always present on the plateau forests. Many of these sounds we hear, but do not register with our vocal cords. Another chance to hear voices and other strangeness is when it is recorded with a recorder. Once I made a comment about the forest, and at home, listening to the recording, I heard a low frequency. When I replayed it, and it was heard more slowly, then more slowly, until frozen. My regular recording of the forest was 10 times slower than the normal one. Also in Hoia Baciu Forest, very often, the batteries of the cameras die, and cameras malfunction in inexplicable ways. It happened this way for us at least 3 times, with teams of TVR. Going into the area before you start shooting, check all the batteries, including the spare, have them fully charged. If your equipment works like ours, it may not help. Despite the trouble we had in the forest, once we got back to Cluj, they began to operate normally. When we were back in the area with the equipment, sometimes I could continue, sometimes not. Battery power was partial and it was difficult. In only one case was the entire thing drained and had used up all the batteries we had recharged. Now, some of the sentences in his accounts may be difficult to understand, and I assume that's a translation error. Now, I'll spare you Adrian Petrut's wilder theories of the forest for time's sake, but they have to do with something he refers to as bioplasma, as well as ectoplasm, 4D space, and psychic energy. Now, Hoia Baciu has been featured in 2 well-known paranormal shows, Destination Truth and Ghost Adventures. Both shows investigated the part of the forest called Poiana Rotunda, a clearing in the wood where supposedly nothing grows. But grass does grow in this clearing, and nothing about it seems out of the ordinary. Lab tests recorded on Destination Truth revealed there is nothing odd about the soil within the clearing. Now, both shows had experiences. One of the Destination Truth team members seemed to be attacked by an unseen force within the clearing, and Ghost Adventures captured a red orb in the distance. Now these shows need to get viewers for their paranormal shows, and so what we see happening on camera needs to be taken with a large grain of salt. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention these investigations. Speaking of investigations, there are a ton of YouTube videos of tourists exploring the wood and allegedly encountering strange activity. But these videos just consist of the videographers overreacting to the mundane or easily explained. So unfortunately, we will have to discount these as well. Now let's move on to theories. There is a lot of odd activity in the area which makes it a Bermuda Triangle of sorts. We have apparitions, voices, orbs of light, UFOs, mirages, poltergeists, and malfunctioning electronics, as well as negative physical effects, all in this forest. The local legend states that the forest is haunted by the trapped spirits of ancient Romanian peasants who were murdered there. These tormented spirits are said to be enraged by their predicament and can show themselves to people who travel there. The oldest Neolithic settlement in Romania was discovered in this area. Tombs and houses belonging to the Starcevo-Core-Chris culture was uncovered here between 1960 and 1994. Given Transylvania's ancient history and the rise of rulers such as the bloodthirsty Vlad the Impaler, it would be easy to assume that the Hoia Forest has seen its fair share of death. As mentioned earlier, some believe it to be a thin place between our world and another reality, and that in this veil, any number of strange things could happen. As far as unidentified flying objects in this area, they could be products of the area if it is truly a portal to another dimension. Or they could be experimental craft from the nearby Soviet Union, which was in power at the same time as the flap of UFO sightings. The Soviet Union did occupy this region for a while, but Emil Barnet's encounter happened about 10 years after the occupation had ended. Now on to a more logical explanation, which might explain many haunted locations. Infrasound. Infrasound is a sound that is lower in frequency than what humans are capable of hearing, so below 20 Hz. Now prolonged exposure to infrasound can produce symptoms such as headaches, tinnitus, anxiety, irritability, night terrors, concentration and memory problems, issues with equilibrium, dizziness, nausea, a feeling of fear or dread, and in some cases, optical illusions. All of these symptoms line up perfectly to what witnesses have experienced in the forest. Now, I am not sure if there are any tests for infrasound in this area. I am also not sure what could be producing the low frequency in the forest, but there are a lot of things that can produce infrasound. Earthquakes, meteors, ocean waves, fans, vibrating pipes, and even some animals like elephants can produce infrasound. Now, I'm not saying there are elephants in Hoia Baciu, but you get the idea. Once again, I am not trying to debunk anything, I am just trying to present all ideas. Infrasound cannot explain all of the events happening in this forest, but I definitely think it's a good candidate as a contributor to the strangeness. And with that, we'll wrap up this minisode. If you like the podcast, please leave a rating and tell your friends about us. We are a small podcast that is really trying to grow. After all, the more, the merrier. If you have a question, comment, suggestion for a future episode, or a story of something that you have experienced, please contact us on social media or email us at snipehuntpodcast@gmail.com. Big shout out to my co-host Gary. You're awesome, and I'll see you on the next full episode. The Enchanted Forest is a trope that has existed in folklore since the very beginning. It is a place of magic and danger, where strange creatures lurk and the land itself seems alive. As far as Hoia Baciu goes, is it indeed a dark enchanted forest? Or is it the product of superstition and a natural phenomena? We may never know for sure, but what we do know is that this strange place is full of frightening folklore.
Once again, we want to thank you for listening to Snipe Hunt. Your listening has been noted and will be reported with the proper authorities. All audio used was done so under the protection of fair use.
Logo design is by Ethan Rothfuss. The music used for this episode was composed by Mayu and Nature World 1986. We'll continue to search for the unexplained and will hopefully see you on the next hunt.